This is Duke University.
All black, everything, everything black, culture over everything, y'all, we taking it back, black.
Welcome to Left to Black. I'm your host, Anthony Neal. We're joined today by David Swerdlick, longtime columnist and current associate editor of TheRoot.com. How are you doing today, David?
I'm okay, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming through. One of the reasons why we wanted to have you on, obviously, to talk about a range of things, but in particular, a piece that you've just recently done, Why I Love Being a Black Man, which is a response to a British writer's claim of why he hates being a black man. So tell us a little bit about that first article and what kind of piqued your interest, to feel the need to want to respond.
Okay, and actually the writer Orville Lloyd Douglas is a Canadian writer, but he wrote his piece, like you said, Why I Hate Being a Black Man
For the British version.
In the UK's The Guardian newspaper. It got a lot of reaction, and he really laid it out there that, as a black man, an African Canadian living, in Canada and in Toronto specifically, he feels like looking like a black man, having the persona of a black man, being a black writer, and he's a poet, he doesn't get a positive reception from people around him, whether it's people that he knows or people riding with him on the Toronto subway. And it was really a striking piece. I took issue with some parts of it, Mark, but at the same time, I give him credit for putting his feelings out there that were so raw. And he said he felt like being a black man consigned him to a life of misery and shame. It was really
and I'm sure there are lots of folks who read that piece and thought, I get that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You get what it means to be, embodied in a certain kind of way and having to navigate these spaces and all the stuff that it means to be a black man, in the world. Everything from trying to catch a taxi cab and the kind of microaggressions that go on every day. But to label it, I hate being in that space, is almost a really different kind of turn.
It is, and it's striking, I guess, partly because we're at this place in time, right, in 2013, where I think we've come to a consensus that we're not a post-racial society, but we've also come to a consensus that we're sort of evolving racially as a society, and yet this is a guy who really feels like his life has been essentially ruined by being black because of, as you said, these microaggressions. And the fact that he's Canadian, talked about it in Britain, then we talked about it here, it's this whole global discussion. Yeah.
It's an interesting moment in that regard. We know what the numbers look like in terms of, say, the prison industrial complex, right? We know things like stop and frisk in New York. Yet when you turn on the television, LeBron, it's arguably the most recognizable and loved black man in the world.
Right.
President Obama, even those folks who disagree with him politically, recognize the value of the brand, if you will, right? Even when you talk about men like Jay-Z and Kanye, and folks have all kinds of different appearances, right? But it suggests that when we see them represented, even overrepresented in the culture, that we've gotten to a place where the larger cultures are comfortable with black men, but part of what that piece suggests is that that's not the case. And what would you attribute that kind of disconnect to?
Well, I think it's a couple of things. One, and I am not a sociologist or a scholar, so I think what you're alluding to is this idea that we have this, society now where black men and black women are leading in all these very visible fields, but at the same time, for most black people, we are still part of a minority group that is sometimes viewed with some suspicion by the majority. I think what Mr. Douglas was up against is this kind of feeling like, okay, he can't be taken as an individual, that you're either in this space where you are one of these LeBrons or Obamas, or you're a second-class citizen as an anonymous black person. And I think that was unfortunate. Where I give him credit was pointing out that we still have a long way to go in terms of the average black person being able to feel like they're an individual. Where I feel like his reaction was unfortunate was this idea that he translated that one step further into him hating himself, or feel like maybe he had some reason to hate himself, and I don't think he should.
You're watching Left to Black. I'm your host, Anthony Neal. We're joined today by David Swerdlick, longtime columnist and associate editor for TheRoot.com, who's joining us here in the John Hope Franklin studios, talking about his recent piece, Why I Love Being a Black Man. Let's talk a little bit about media framing for a second.
Sure.
You could offer your response from a platform that you have at TheRoot.com. It's going to circulate to the extent that that particular brand circulates. Are we at a moment where Mr. Douglas could write a piece that was in some ways a negative assessment of blackness, that it gets a framing in the media in a way that had someone just written a piece before him that said why I love being a black man, that no one would ever even talk about it?
Yeah, no, and that's part of this whole discussion that we're in, both in terms of his view coming from Canada, going to the UK and coming back to the US. It's part of this discussion that we now have on social media and on the internet where people are reacting to other people's opinions. You actually just nailed it, right? Yeah. If someone had come out first and said, if I had come out first and said right, why I love being a black man, you can imagine some of the response being, well, why do you even need to say that? Right. Whereas because I was responding to him saying why he hated a black man, I think my piece made a little more sense. And I think it also underscored that, wow, this is a guy who really is struggling with this idea of his own blackness, even though he made some very salient points in his piece as well. What I think needs to happen is that, and this is not an immediate thing, and this isn't something that's dealt with in a couple of articles, but we still need a discussion in our society, globally, throughout the African diaspora, where we're saying, okay, there's us as black people, and then there's us as African Americans, and then there's us as people, and then there's us as individuals. And these things overlap, and they're related, but they're all different kinds of discussions, and that's what I think he was struggling with.
Let me shift gears a little bit, though, staying with this kind of theme about what we think about black men. There's been this interesting controversy over the film Best Man Holiday. On the one hand, the film's been incredibly commercially successful. I think it's been very surprising to folks, right? The idea of a black rom-com that's not directed by Tyler Perry, right? To have the kind of success it has. And it's a song. It's a movie that really does celebrate black relationships, and not just in terms of romantic context, but even friendships in ways that we haven't seen before. But of course, there's this controversy now about a film in which there are four black actors, right, who are partnered in the context of the film, but 3D actors in their real life, have chosen white partners, and a real discussion about, do we undermine, or folks are thinking, are we undermining the validity of a message in a film like that if the men who are acting in the film don't make those kind of choices? And not that I want you to answer that, my question for you, particularly as you've been kind of watching how the landscape has shifted through the lens of a Barack Obama, what does it say about African Americans at this point in time that's even part of the discussion? That we need to parse out at this moment, when that we take fictional characters seriously because of the different kinds of choices actors or actresses might make in their personal lives.
Right, no, I think that's actually a great example, and I would answer it in two ways, Mark. One is that I think that although it's a discussion worth having, and it's an interesting point about this film, like you said, it's a black rom-com, but it's not a movie that focuses primarily on the race of the characters as much as just their lives.
And it's not historical fiction. I mean, that's the other thing, right?
It's just not
12 Years a Slave,
a warm and fuzzy movie, right? And you get this situation where we as African Americans, we want to celebrate ourselves on film. We want to see ourselves in serious films and in rom-coms, and I think we're doing that with Best Man Holiday. And at the same time, then you break it out, as you said, this discussion where it's like, okay, in the film, it's celebrating these black couples, but some of the actors are not married to black women, right? Well, the way I would look at it is this, and I'm speaking both, as an observer and as someone who's biracial and is from an interracial family, a multicultural, multi-faith family. I think that, again, it's this overlap where we've got to be able to recognize as individuals and as black people that, there's a point where we can acknowledge the importance of strong black families, of black men and women loving one another in relationships, and also understanding that our individuality makes it so that, if people find love in an interracial relationship, that is something to be celebrated too. If I could just point out one thing, which would be that some of it is generational, right? You mentioned President Obama. I think that for him, as an icon, as an important African American, as an important politician, President Obama, as someone who's biracial, but who finds himself in a very traditional black nuclear family, is a role model in a certain sense. And then at the same time, you see that the family that he he was created from. His mother and father's interracial relationship was also a role model in a certain sense.
It makes you, makes you want to even speculate, what kind of choices, Sasha and Malia are going to make, right, in terms of their partnering, and what kind of framing, what kind of interest will the larger community have on those kinds of choices.
Yeah, definitely.
You're watching Left of Black. I'm Mark Anthony Neal, joined with David Swerdlick this afternoon. He is associate editor of TheRoot.com, also a longtime columnist. Let's talk about, the journalism issue, issues these days. You have, you've always been David Swerdlick, but you've become David Swerdlick, right?
All right.
In this particular moment where we're seeing all of these online brands, right? Whether we're talking The Root, the rebranded ebony.com, think about what's been going on with HuffPost, Black Voices.
Right.
I mean, so we have all these entities there. And it's almost like it's like a Renaissance moment where, like, if you are a Black writer, you now have an opportunity to get your words out there through these particular platforms. And if you don't want those platforms, you can always have a blog and use Twitter. Right. And how has that changed your view of what you wanted to do as a writer and a journalist, given these new platforms? Thinking about what you wanted to do 10 years ago, right? And of course, we go back,
to
the online site Pop Matters,
Pop
right?
Matters,
so we're both
right.
playing with this a decade ago. But, I know when I was growing up and thinking about being a writer, right, it's about being in the Village Voice, right? It's about writing for the Sunday New York Times Magazine. These other platforms weren't even imaginable. So how does that change how you see yourself as a writer and a journalist?
I think that's a really good question. And right, you brought up, in fact, you were one of the writers that when I was first starting out writing with Pop Matters, I saw your articles on Pop Matters and I was like, I want to write some of that kind of stuff. And, as a writer, it's great to have these outlets. It's great to have outlets that are magazines that are sort of for and by an African-American audience, and then also magazines that are not specifically for and by an African-American audience. In terms of writing for The Root, for instance, I've been writing for The Root for years, and when I started out, I was thinking of writing about issues that were more in line with what we were talking about with the Best Man holiday and these kind of cultural things. As the Obama era has progressed, I have really focused in on politics and Obama and what Obama means in our broader
imagine you
politics.
have enough stuff at this point, to do your post-Obama era book, given the way that you've weighed in over the years.
I'm going to try. Okay, I'm going to try.
But that raises another question also. I think everybody was obviously excited, at least folks who supported the president when he first got elected. But there's a way that his presidency has really just sucked up
It has.
Our attention, our interests, the kinds of issues we can talk about, the way that we talk about those issues, right?
Right. No, it definitely has. I mean, when President Obama was elected, there was a celebration, I think, throughout the culture, not just among African Americans, but I think Americans in general felt like, wow, we did this. You know what I'm saying? We from our history, now we have an African American president, and people of all nationalities really were proud of that. But because he is such a unique figure in our history, he's been a lightning rod both for a lot of praise and for a lot of criticism, to the point where, and I think anybody would agree, there's just so much controversy in terms of when he's being criticized. Is it because he's a Black guy, or is it because he's just being criticized because that's what happens when you're president? And I think that is the challenge for us as a society, and challenge for us as writers, right? To sort of parse it out and say, okay, in some instances, look, people are reacting to the president as a Black man, but other times people are reacting to him just as a president. The way I see sort of the Obama project is this idea of not so much that he is supposed to be a figure for the ages, nor is he supposed to be someone who is doing something specifically to uplift African Americans or any particular group. It's the idea that we have an idea of what our president is in our American history, and the question is, does a Black man fit into that? And I think he actually does, because he's not something different than other presidents.
And ironically, I think a lot of the disappointed that some folks, particularly on the Black left, have of President Obama is because he so comfortably fits into that trajectory. Right.
Well, and one thing, this has come up, and I know this is something I'm sure you focused on, is that one thing that's come up is this idea that he has disappointed people on the left. And he's also disappointed people more recently, I know, in terms of when he has sort of almost chastised or scolded African Americans for not maybe taking more ownership of issues that sort of a residual in the black community, and people said, hey, whoa, ease up a little bit on us, President Obama. Well, the thing is that I like to tell people, if you look at him as just a regular president, if you look at this guy with his Brooks Brothers suit, his perfect family, the trajectory he's gone on, and you say, okay, he's like a black Ward Cleaver. Okay, and that if you look at him that way, he's or a young Bill Cosby. You know what I'm saying? If you look at him that way, it's much easier to understand where he's coming from. He's not trying to flip the script. He's trying to stick with the script, and that's where he's.
And the reality is, when this is all over, in 2016, he's going to be still a relatively young man.
Right.
I mean, there's still an argument that his best work, right, will come after.
In theory.
After that moment. I mean, when you look at even the way that Bill Clinton has been civically engaged since his presidency, I mean, he's done some really quality work, since he was Jimmy Carter, who was someone who we think of as having really a failed presidency. Who has become so much more of the statesman.
Right. Although I think Carter's gotten a bad rap.
I agree with that.
I actually am not sure about that. I think you're right that that's a question that we need to start asking 3 years out from the end of the Obama presidency. But I'm not sure because, President Obama, you're right. He's a young guy. He certainly has a lot of potential. At the same time, I don't sense in him at this point that desire to mix and mingle that you have in a Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton has to be in the mix.
Right.
And I'm not sure Barack Obama has to be in the mix in that way. So we'll see. Yeah.
We've been here with David Swerdlick, Associate Editor for TheRoot.com. I'm Mark Anthony, your host. You're watching Left of Black. What's next for you, David?
I'm going to continue writing about President Obama. I think as we go into the 2014, there's a lot of issues on the table for our national politics. I think this new deal with Iran is going to be talked about a lot. The president is really struggling with Obamacare, his signature piece of legislation, and then you've got immigration. And to me, looking at the administration and what they want their legacy to be, that's a full bucket. You know what I mean? If they try and keep going and adding more to the plate, they're going to be struggling. I think they've got to focus in on those few issues and see if they can make it work the way they want it to work on those few issues and not let their agenda sprawl. Yeah.
David Swerdlick, Associate Editor of TheRoot.com, longtime columnist, Mark Anthony Neal, your host of Left of Black. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Welcome to Left of Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal. We're joined today via Skype by Ms. Esther Armah, longtime journalist and activist and playwright, and let's just say woman of all talents and trades. How are you doing today, Esther?
I'm good. Thank you so much for inviting me. Here I am finally on Left of Black. We've been trying to make this happen.
And I'm going to put you out there, right? Because we literally have been trying to do this for almost 4 years. So thank you for finally coming into the 21st century technologically. And there's some irony, and let me just start here. There's some irony. I mean, you're someone who's across many media platforms, whether it be Tumblr or Twitter, Facebook, you did radio in New York City for a long time. You're a contributor to MSNBC's programs on the weekend. But yet there still seems to be, for many journalists, this whole other arena of technology and platforms that you still have to master at this point also. So what's that challenge been like for you, trying to come into like the microblogging world, for instance?
It's so interesting because I think I'm so technologically advanced theoretically, but the practical reality of it is just elusive for me. And I'm one of those weird kind of 21st century / old school journalists because I still have notebooks from trips I made across Africa in 1997, 1998 on the one hand. And on the other hand, I do these campaigns for emotional justice that are all about the importance of Tumblr and social media and Facebook and understanding how to create intimacy using technology. It's a complete contradiction, I know, but hey, what can I say?
Are you still using a cassette recorder to tape interviews?
And I still have one. You know what? You shouldn't even laugh because I really do still have one. When my mother was over here in New York, she said, your sister's still trying to get rid of your old ass stuff. Well, she didn't say ass, but she did say old. And I still have it, and I refuse to allow anybody to get rid of it.
For some time now, Esther, you've been involved in a campaign, again, on multiple platforms around this idea of emotional justice. Can you share a little bit with our audience about what emotional justice is and what kind of things you're hoping to achieve within that context?
Emotional justice was something I created over 10 years ago now. And it really began through the personal experience of my family, just very, very briefly. My father was a politician. He was an activist in colonial Ghana and was a politician under Kwame Nkrumah. And my family were survivors of the first coup that essentially ended the first black presidency's term in Ghana. And the night of that coup was really traumatic for not just my family, but for so many different families. And it was a story that was untold in my family for almost 30 years. But the legacy of the trauma of that night, where there was violence and guns and blood, it was a nightmare. The legacy of that trauma and the 2 years of house arrest was something that lived with us for a long, long time. So I became interested in the ways in which emotionality shape how we move through the world. So I was and am an educated chick. I was a journalist. I was doing this particular work, but my emotionality kept interrupting my progress. It started personally, and then because I was a journalist who was interested in history and politics and activism, it was something that was personal that then became communal and institutional. And so emotional justice is about the process and practice of dealing with our legacies of untreated trauma and looking for ways to practically navigate that. So I do it with creative campaigns, with art, and with journalism.
You're watching Left to Black. I'm your host, Anthony Neal. We're here with longtime journalist, activist, and playwright Esther Armah. Esther, we've been talking about the emotional justice campaign that, as you just said, you've been doing for more than 10 years. One of the activities that you were involved in very recently was around 31 Days for Marissa Alexander. Talk about your interest in this case and what your emotional justice campaign was able to do in terms of responding to this particular situation that Miss Alexander's in.
With emotional justice, it's about looking for practical ways to have intimate public conversations about the things that we really don't want to talk about. And with 31 for Marissa, October being Domestic Violence Awareness, I wanted to create a campaign specifically about the engagement of men with domestic violence as an issue. And the way that we do campaigns, the way that we do the way that we do the work with emotional justice is specifically around connection. It is not just discussion, it's not just intellectual or theoretical, but it is about connection, which enables the kind of change that we're working to build. And so 31 for Marissa was a combination of ideas from Mariama Kaba, who is the co-founder of the Chicago Task Force on Violence Against Girls and Women, and myself. Between us, we came up with this idea of one letter per day to Marissa, but from men, black, white, brown, yellow, red, men from all over the country. And the intention was very specific and very simple, to elevate her name and her case in media headlines. Knowing the power of media to transform, to move, to provoke action, I wanted to use the tools of social media to make that happen. So through Tumblr, which is where we have our swag spot, that's our intimate public conversation around masculinity, and it's a space specifically created for men with other men. So through Tumblr, through Twitter, we did Twitter chats 4 times, I think, throughout the month, through Facebook, really through social media, we created this campaign. The power of it was to create this media presence, media focus around Marissa Alexander, and the beautiful thing was that it worked.
Were you surprised by the kind of outpouring of support that you got? I mean, I know you wrote about the fact that, there were men who didn't know Marissa Alexander, but still felt compelled to really give heartfelt responses to it. Did any of that surprise you?
The thing that is surprising is the degree to which, honestly, there is a disconnection when it comes to violence, acts of violence, and particularly black women. The reality that this is not a woman that you would have any empathy for is the thing that is shocking. Black woman to black woman, it is always shocking to me, the absolute absence of empathy when it comes to a scenario in which you could imagine somebody that you love, but you cannot see the humanity for a black woman, another black woman. And so the thing that became powerful, on the one hand, was just the different types of men. Like, we literally had men from all over the country to boys. We had black high school boys here in New York. We had middle-aged CEO white men from the Midwest in Chicago. We had a man wrote to us, he said he was the son of Hindu immigrants and showed how Marissa's story connected to his grandmother's story. We had gay men, we had straight men, we had white men, we had black men, we had brown men, we had incarcerated teenagers from Rikers Island. It was really extraordinary the way the campaign was framed, asking men to talk about their stories of domestic violence, but with a specific emphasis on what men did, to see what we can do when we create connection, that it really is, and it has the potential for the kind of transformation that we always talk about is elusive. I mean, in the end, the last week, we were getting letters from men who had convictions for domestic violence.
We're here with Esther Armah. You're watching Left of Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal. One of the campaigns that you're about to begin is the F word for the holiday season. Tell us which F word you're talking about.
Well, it ain't that one. Ladies and gentlemen, chill. Yeah, the F word, F stands for forgiveness. The F word is going to be the next emotional justice campaign, and it is really about Christmas and Christmas cards. Of course, we know that the 12 days of Christmas, traditionally it's between December the 25th and January the 9th, but we're going to be creative and create our own 12 days, like right in we black like that. The F word is about writing a card around forgiveness, and it is part of our Black Love Reimagining series. We did a couple of panels back in 2011, because Emotional Justice is an arts and conversation series. We were having conversations about how we can reimagine Black love. And so the F word will be an annual campaign for the 12 days of Christmas that is about forgiveness. And we ask Black women, Black men to create a card, but it's a card for social media. It is not a physical card that you're going to put in there. It's not snail mail, it's social media. And so the card asks you 4 questions about forgiveness. Firstly, for yourself, whether there's somebody that you would like to forgive, and if so, for what? And it's really about how hard we are on one another. A people who is subject to the amount of injustice that Black people are, the weight of injustice, its toll is relentless. And it makes us really, really hard on one another, because to carry the kind of grief that comes from being subject to a relentless toll of injustice shapes and distorts and changes how you love one another. It has to. How can it not, when you're constantly navigating people's belief that you're not even entitled to due process? That Renisha McBride, a Detroit young 19-year-old American teenager, could be shot in the face, and you're just supposed to carry on like nothing.
Right.
And so the legacy of those traumas are real. And so we wanted to create a campaign that was offering us another way to love one another. And because forgiveness really can be revolution, it can be a way to reconnect. And so we wanted something that was simple, that was small, that was easy. So you just answer those 4 questions. They'll be on the Emotional Justice Facebook page. You can answer 1, you can answer 2, you can answer 3, you can answer 4. You can choose who you send it to. You can choose how you sign it. You just email it to us. We're going to put it up on our Swagspot Tumblr, and then people can read each other's cards and be inspired to forgive or to send their own. That's what our campaign is about.
We're here with Esther Armah, longtime journalist, activist, playwright, woman of all talents and trades, who's talking to us today on Left of Black about her emotional justice campaign. Esther, I'm going to shift just a little bit. You know, we get to see your brilliant and beautiful self often enough on MSNBC. Many of us had become very comfortable hearing that voice of yours, also very beautiful and very brilliant, in New York City airwaves, you know, on a regular basis, bringing your passions, to the radio and bringing voices to that space also. And so I imagine you have a particular view of what mainstream corporate media looks like today. What kind of challenges at this moment, does the corporate media structure pose in terms of us being able to tell the kinds of stories that we need to tell?
It's really important, I think, for us to have our own media in addition to working within mainstream media. Because mainstream media is like party politics. It is by definition a limited power. It is limited because it only offers you a certain amount of freedom. And so for me, for somebody who now lives in New York, but who lived and has done journalism in London and has done journalism across Africa as well as in America, it has been really important to navigate different spaces within media. So mainstream media is important because it allows you the opportunity to expand your voice to other parts of the world and to other audiences. And independent media allows you the freedom to articulate exactly what it is you really want to do. And when you put the two spaces together, you're enabling a mainstream media audience to have access to your progressive political self and work and life. And so for me, navigating the media effectively is about understanding how to navigate power and how to use it in a way that works.
We've been here talking with Esther Armah, longtime activist and journalist and playwright. Esther, what's next for you in the new year, 2014?
I'm very excited. My fourth play, which is called Savior, goes to Chicago.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm going to Chicago too. I'm really excited about that. The play debuted in New York in 2011, and we had a fabulous reaction. It was both critically and commercially acclaimed, sold out a whole bunch of shows, so we were very excited about that. And ETA Creative Arts Foundation, which is a great theater company in Chicago, picked the play up. So we're doing a full 8-week production from March all the way through to May. And so I'm really excited about that. And then it's really, and before that, I'm working on the book. I've been working on an emotional justice book for a minute. And as you know, writing is torture.
Yes.
Writing is torture. My Lord, it's torture. And
but you
I'm excited that I've been writing.
Yeah, you have a new gig with alternate.org, right?
Alternate.com, yes, which is a great award-winning mainstream news magazine. And it has been about taking emotional justice to bigger and bigger audiences. Emotional justice, I always conceived it as a global arts and conversation series. I'm a global chick. I was born in London. I'm Black British. I'm Ghanaian. I live in New York. And so I always conceived it that way. And so going to Chicago with the play is actually a look at masculinity. It's an emotional justice conversation, but from a different space. And because I'm a playwright, the way that we frame emotional justice is to use the power of the art to do the same thing that I do with the campaigns and with the live events. So Chi-Town, here I come. I'm excited. And more writing for alternate.com. I'm excited about that too.
So we've been here today with the self-described global chick, one of our favorite people, Ms. Esther Armah. Thank you for joining us today, Esther.
Thank you so much, Mark Anthony Neal. It only took 4 years. We got there. Thank you so much.
Yes, we did. Take care.
Take care. Thank you.
Black lights and booze burn when I record for Watts. And every black like Troy Davis who never had a fair shot. All black everything black, culture over everything, y'all. We taking it back.